The gunshot cracked through the morning air like thunder, startling Beatrice Eden from her thoughts as she stood on the rickety porch of her father's general store. Salida, Colorado wasn't known for violence, at least not since the mining disputes had settled 5 years prior in 1873, but that sound brought her heart to her throat all the same. She gathered her skirts and raced toward the commotion, propriety forgotten in her haste to ensure no one was hurt. The year was 1878, and Salida was growing from a small mining settlement into something resembling a proper town, nestled between mountains that stood sentinel over the Arkansas River Valley. The railroad had brought prosperity, but also its fair share of trouble. "Stand down, Tucker." Sheriff Wilson's voice boomed across the dusty Main Street. "We don't need more blood spilled today." Beatrice slowed her pace as she approached the crowd gathered outside the Monarch Saloon. Through the throng of onlookers, she spotted the source of the disturbance, a man she'd never seen before, standing with his back to the saloon's entrance, revolver still smoking in his hand. At his feet, another man writhed in pain, clutching his shoulder. "He drew first," the stranger said, his voice deep and steady. "And I aimed to wound, not kill." He holstered his weapon with a practiced motion that spoke of years handling firearms. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair visible beneath a well-worn Stetson. His clothes were trail-dusty but of good quality, not a drifter then, but not local either. "Quinn Eastwood," he introduced himself to the sheriff, tipping his hat slightly. "Just passing through." The sheriff looked from Quinn to the wounded man. "This true, Clancy, you drew first." The wounded man, Clancy, spat into the dirt. "Bastard cheated at cards." "Lying won't serve you, friend," Quinn said calmly. "3 witnesses saw you try to slip that ace from your boot." Beatrice found herself moving closer, drawn by something in the stranger's demeanor. There was confidence there, but not the swaggering bravado she'd come to associate with most cowboys who passed through Salida. This man carried himself differently. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Get Clancy to Doc Miller's," he instructed 2 men from the crowd. "And you," he turned to Quinn, "I'll need a statement." Quinn nodded, then his eyes caught Beatrice's. For a moment the world around her seemed to still. His eyes were a striking blue, not the pale blue of a summer sky, but deeper, like the mountain lakes after the spring thaw. Something passed between them, brief but undeniable. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly averted her gaze. It wasn't proper for a lady of her standing to stare at strange men in the street, especially one who'd just been involved in a shooting. Her father, Harold Eden, was one of Salida's founding citizens, and expectations for his only daughter's behavior were high. "Miss Eden," Sheriff Wilson acknowledged her with a nod. "Perhaps you should return to the store. This isn't a suitable scene for a lady." Beatrice straightened her spine. At 22, she'd grown tired of being treated like a delicate flower. "I heard the shot and was concerned there might be someone in need of aid." Her eyes flickered to Quinn again. "Is everyone all right?" "Just a flesh wound," Quinn answered before the sheriff could. "Nothing that will trouble him long, though his pride might take longer to heal." There was a hint of amusement in his voice that brought an unexpected smile to Beatrice's lips. "Miss Eden runs the apothecary section of her father's store," Sheriff Wilson explained to Quinn. "Always rushing to help when there's trouble." "An admirable quality," Quinn said, his eyes lingering on her face. Beatrice's father appeared then, his normally pleasant expression clouded with concern. "Beatrice, come away now. This is no place for you." "Yes, father," she replied dutifully, but found herself reluctant to leave. "Perhaps Mr. Eastwood will need supplies for his stay in Salida," she added. "Our store carries everything a traveler might require." Quinn's mouth twitched slightly at the corners. "I'll keep that in mind, Miss Eden." As her father led her away, Beatrice couldn't help glancing back over her shoulder. Quinn Eastwood was watching her go, and when their eyes met again, he tipped his hat slightly in acknowledgement. Later that afternoon, the bell above the store's door jingled, and Beatrice looked up from her inventory ledger to find Quinn Eastwood standing in the entrance. He'd cleaned up, she noticed. His face freshly shaved, hair damp from a recent bath, and clothes changed from his trail gear to a simple but clean shirt and vest. "Mr. Eastwood," she greeted, trying to keep her voice professional despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "How may I help you today?" "Just Quinn, please," he said, removing his hat as he stepped fully into the store. "I find myself in need of supplies. Sheriff Wilson suggested your establishment was the finest in town." "He's too kind," Beatrice replied, setting aside her ledger. "What sort of supplies do you need?" Quinn wandered toward the counter, his eyes taking in the neatly arranged shelves of goods. "I'm not entirely sure yet. I'll be staying in Salida for a while." "Oh," Beatrice couldn't help her curiosity. "Business or pleasure?" A shadow crossed his face briefly before his expression smoothed once more. "A bit of both, perhaps. I've purchased some land south of town, planning to raise horses." This surprised her. Most newcomers were either passing through or looking to make quick money in the mines. Few came with intentions to put down roots. "The old Wilson property?" she asked. When he nodded, she continued, "It's beautiful land, though it's fallen into disrepair since Mr. Wilson passed." "Nothing that can't be fixed with hard work," Quinn said, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the wooden counter between them. "You don't strike me as a man afraid of hard work," Beatrice observed, then blushed at her forwardness. Quinn smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "And what do I strike you as, Miss Eden?" "Beatrice, please," she countered, finding unexpected boldness. "And I'm not entirely sure yet." "You're something of a mystery, Mr. Eastwood." "Quinn," he reminded her gently. "Quinn," she repeated, enjoying the shape of his name on her lips. "Well, Beatrice," he said, her name sounding somehow different in his deep voice. "Perhaps we can solve that mystery together during my stay in Salida." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more customers, and Quinn stepped back, allowing her to attend to them. But before he left the store, he purchased an unusual assortment of items: quality rope, tools, seeds for a vegetable garden, a book of local flora, and surprisingly a small bottle of lavender water. "The rope and tools I understand," Beatrice said as she wrapped his purchases. "But the lavender water," Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners. "My mother always said a house isn't a home until it has at least one thing of beauty with no purpose beyond bringing joy." He tucked the small bottle carefully into his pocket. "I thought it might help make that old cabin feel less empty." With that, he bid her good day and departed, leaving Beatrice staring after him with a mixture of confusion and fascination. Over the next 2 weeks, Quinn became a regular visitor to the Eden General Store. Each visit brought new conversations, longer than strictly necessary for business. Beatrice learned he had come from Texas, where he'd worked as a ranch foreman. He spoke little of his family, only mentioning a younger sister who had married and moved to California. He was 30 years old, well-traveled, and possessed a quiet intelligence that surprised her. In turn, she told him about growing up in Salida, watching it transform from a tiny settlement to a growing town. She shared her love of botany, how she'd convinced her father to let her expand the apothecary section of the store to include medicinal herbs and remedies she prepared herself. "You should have been a doctor," Quinn observed one afternoon as she explained the properties of willow bark. Beatrice laughed softly. "My father suggested the same once, but the medical college in Denver doesn't admit women. Their loss, Quinn said simply, and the sincere way he said it made her feel seen in a way few ever had before. Word spread quickly in a town like Salida. Soon, Beatrice found herself fielding questions about that Eastwood fellow from curious neighbors and friends. Her friend Lucille was particularly persistent. "He's handsome as sin and buying property," Lucille said during their weekly tea. "Half the unmarried women in town are already planning their wedding dresses." "Don't be ridiculous," Beatrice admonished, though she couldn't deny the small spark of jealousy at the thought. "He's just a customer." "A customer who spends an awful lot of time talking to you," Lucille pointed out with a knowing smile. "And don't think people haven't noticed how you light up when he enters the store." Beatrice had no good response to that, because it was true. Quinn's visits had become the highlight of her days. On a crisp autumn morning, Quinn arrived at the store looking unusually formal in a pressed shirt and clean vest. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner this evening," he asked, the first sign of nervousness she'd seen from him evident in the way he turned his hat in his hands. "The hotel has a decent dining room, I'm told." Beatrice hesitated, not out of reluctance but surprise. "I'd like that," she finally said, warmth spreading through her chest at his evident relief. "I'll call for you at 6 if that suits," she nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes, that would be fine." That evening, Beatrice took unusual care with her appearance, selecting her best dress, a deep blue that her mother had always said matched her eyes, and arranging her chestnut hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. Her father watched her preparations with a mixture of amusement and concern. "This Eastwood fellow," he began as she descended the stairs. "What do we really know about him?" "He's purchased land, father. He intends to raise horses and settle here," she replied. "Sheriff Wilson has made inquiries in Texas and received favorable responses about his character." Harold Eden harumphed. "Just be careful, Beatrice. Men like him, wanderers who suddenly decide to settle, often have reasons for leaving their previous lives behind." "Don't we all have parts of our past we'd prefer to leave behind?" she countered gently. Her father had no response to that. They both knew he'd come west to escape gambling debts in his youth, before he'd met her mother and reformed his ways. Quinn arrived precisely at 6, hat in hand and a small bundle of wildflowers extending toward her. "These reminded me of you," he said. "Wild but elegant." The dinner was pleasant, their conversation flowing easily as it always did. Quinn told her more about his plans for the horse farm, his hope to breed a line that combined the stamina of Mustangs with the temperament of Eastern thoroughbreds. "It sounds like you've given this considerable thought," she observed over dessert. "I've dreamed of my own land for a long time," he admitted. "Working other men's ranches taught me a lot, but there's something about building something that's truly yours." He paused, studying her face. "Do you ever want more than the store, Beatrice?" The question caught her by surprise. Few had ever asked about her ambitions. "I love the apothecary work," she said slowly. "But yes, sometimes I dream of more, a proper study of medicine perhaps, or at least expanding my knowledge of botanical remedies." "You should," Quinn said with conviction. "You have a gift for it." As they walked back to her home, the cool night air filled with the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains, Quinn offered her his arm. The simple contact, her hand resting in the crook of his elbow, sent a pleasant warmth through her despite the chill. "May I see you again tomorrow?" he asked as they reached her front porch. "There's something I'd like to show you if you can spare the afternoon." Curiosity piqued, Beatrice nodded. "I'll arrange for someone to watch the store." The next day, Quinn arrived with a wagon and helped her up onto the seat beside him. "It's not far," he promised as they set off south of town. True to his word, the journey took less than half an hour before he turned down a narrow track that led to the property he'd purchased. The old Wilson homestead came into view, a modest but solidly built cabin with a large barn and corral behind it. What surprised Beatrice was the transformation already underway. The cabin's porch had been repaired, windows reglazed, and a small garden plot cleared beside it. "You've been busy," she remarked as he helped her down from the wagon. "Dawn to dusk most days," he agreed. "Come, I want to show you something specific." He led her around to the back of the cabin where a small greenhouse was taking shape, its wooden frame nearly complete, though the glass panels had yet to be installed. "For your herbs and medicinal plants," Quinn explained, watching her expression carefully. "I thought perhaps you might advise me on which local varieties would thrive here, which have the most use." Beatrice stared at the structure, speechless. That he had not only listened to her passion, but had taken it seriously enough to create a space for it touched her deeply. "Quinn, this is—" She trailed off, emotion making it difficult to find the right words. "Too presumptuous?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "Wonderful," she finished, turning to face him fully. "Truly wonderful." Something shifted between them then, the air suddenly heavy with unspoken feelings. Quinn stepped closer, one hand gently lifting to touch her cheek. "Beatrice," he said softly, "I know I haven't been in Salida long, but I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Her heart raced as she leaned slightly into his touch. "And how is that?" Instead of answering with words, Quinn lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away. But Beatrice remained still, anticipation building until his lips finally met hers in a kiss so tender it made her ache. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Quinn kept his forehead pressed against hers. "Does that answer your question?" she smiled, eyes still closed. "I think I might need you to explain it again." He laughed softly before obliging her with another kiss, this one deeper and more assured. When they finally parted, Quinn took both her hands in his. "I want to court you properly, Beatrice Eden, with your father's permission and the town's knowledge." A flutter of doubt crept into her happiness. "There's something I should tell you first." She took a deep breath. "I was engaged once before, 3 years ago, to the banker's son, Thomas Wyatt." Quinn's expression remained open, waiting for her to continue. "He changed his mind 2 weeks before the wedding, left town for Denver without so much as a goodbye. People were kind enough not to gossip openly, but everyone knows. I wouldn't want you to be surprised by it later." "Thomas Wyatt is a fool," Quinn said simply. "His loss is very much my gain." Relief flooded through her at his easy acceptance. "You're not concerned about courting a woman who's been jilted." "I'm concerned only with making you happy," he replied. "The past is past. I have my own ghosts, Beatrice. We all do." Something in his tone made her wonder about those ghosts, but she didn't press. There would be time enough for sharing old wounds. The following Sunday, Quinn attended church with Beatrice and her father, making their courtship official in the eyes of the town. The reaction was mixed, some, like Lucille, delighted in the romance of it. Others, particularly mothers with eligible daughters, were less enthusiastic about the handsome newcomer being spoken for so quickly. Harold Eden remained cautiously supportive, having been impressed by Quinn's straightforward request for permission to court Beatrice, and his evident respect for both her and her father's position in the community. Autumn deepened into winter, and Quinn's property transformed further. The greenhouse was completed, and Beatrice spent many happy hours there, cultivating herbs and experimenting with new remedies. The barn housed 6 fine horses, now the beginning of Quinn's breeding stock, and the cabin had become a proper home, comfortable and welcoming. It was during a heavy December snowfall that their peaceful new beginning was first disrupted. Beatrice was alone in the store, her father having gone to Denver for business, when a stranger entered, shaking snow from his coat. "Can I help you?" she asked, noting the man's quality clothing and city manners. He wasn't local, that much was certain. "I certainly hope so, miss," he replied with a tight smile. "I'm looking for a man named Quinn Eastwood. I understand he's taken up residence near here." Something in the man's tone put Beatrice on guard. "May I ask who's inquiring?" "Of course. How rude of me." He extended a gloved hand. "Marshall Reeves. I represent certain interests in Texas who have unfinished business with Mr. Eastwood." Beatrice didn't take his hand. "What sort of business?" Marshall Reeves withdrew his hand, his smile cooling. "Private business, I'm afraid. Financial matters. Nothing that need concern a lady such as yourself." "Mr. Eastwood conducts his affairs openly," she replied, instinctively protective. "If there are financial matters to discuss, perhaps you should speak with the bank manager." "This predates his arrival in Salida," Reeves said smoothly. "Now, if you could simply direct me to his property, I won't trouble you further." "He's not at home," Beatrice said truthfully. Quinn had ridden to a neighboring town to look at a stallion for sale. "He's expected back tomorrow. You might try the hotel until then." Reeves studied her face for a moment, as though assessing the truth of her statement. "Very well, I shall do that." He turned to leave, then paused. "You and Mr. Eastwood are close. He's a valued customer and friend," Beatrice answered carefully. "I see." Reeves nodded slowly. "Good day, Miss Eden." "Beatrice Eden, Miss Eden." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Beatrice with a sense of unease that lingered long after he'd gone. When Quinn returned the next day, she immediately told him about the visitor. The change in his demeanor was instant and alarming. His normally open expression closed off, his body tensing visibly. "What did he want?" Quinn asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "He said he represented interests in Texas with financial business with you," Beatrice replied, watching him carefully. "Quinn, who is he? What does he want?" Quinn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd rarely seen from him. "It's complicated," he finally said. "Part of my past I'd hoped wouldn't follow me here. Are you in some kind of trouble?" He took her hands in his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Not the kind you're thinking. I've broken no laws, Beatrice. But there are men in Texas who believe I owe them something I can't give." "What?" Quinn sighed deeply. "The full story is long and ugly. The short version is that I worked for a man named Victor Blackwood. He owns one of the largest ranches in Texas. I was his foreman for 5 years. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Blackwood is not a good man. He built his empire through intimidation and violence, driving smaller ranchers off their land. I didn't know the extent of it when I first went to work for him." Beatrice squeezed his hands encouragingly. "Go on." "When I discovered what was happening, I confronted him. It didn't go well. I left his employ, but before I did, I made sure certain documents found their way to a federal marshal evidence of Blackwood's dealings. And now he's sent this Reeves person after you," Beatrice concluded. "For revenge," Quinn nodded grimly. "Blackwood doesn't take betrayal lightly, even if it was betrayal of something corrupt. The last man who crossed him ended up dead in a hunting accident." Fear gripped Beatrice's heart. "Quinn, if this man is as dangerous as you say, I can handle Reeves," Quinn interrupted, his voice firm. "But I'm sorry this has followed me here into your life." Beatrice reached up to touch his face gently. "Our life," she corrected. "Whatever trouble comes, we'll face it together." Quinn's expression softened, love evident in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Perhaps not," she teased, trying to lighten the mood. but you have me nonetheless." The encounter with Reeves marked a turning point in their relationship. Quinn became more open about his past, sharing the painful details of his time working for Blackwood and the moral compromises he'd made before finally taking a stand. Beatrice, in turn, confided more about her broken engagement, how Thomas's abandonment had left her doubting her judgment and reluctant to trust her heart again. These revelations, rather than driving them apart, only deepened their connection. By Christmas, when Quinn presented her with a delicate silver ring set with a small but perfect sapphire, Beatrice accepted his proposal without hesitation. "Spring wedding," he suggested as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I don't want to wait that long," she admitted. "February, perhaps." "Unless that's too soon." Quinn's smile was answer enough. Their engagement was celebrated throughout Salida, and even Harold Eden, still occasionally wary of his future son-in-law's mysterious past, couldn't deny the happiness Quinn brought to his daughter's life. Plans for the wedding progressed quickly, with the church booked for the second Saturday in February. It was a week before the wedding when Marshal Reeves returned, this time accompanied by two hard-faced men whose gun belts and watchful eyes marked them as hired muscle rather than businessmen. They cornered Quinn outside the livery stable late in the day when few people were about. Beatrice, having just closed the store, witnessed the confrontation from across the street. "Mr. Eastwood," Reeves called, his voice carrying in the cold air. "I believe we have business to discuss." Quinn turned slowly, his posture deceptively relaxed, though Beatrice could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have no business with you, Reeves, or with Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood disagrees," Reeves replied, stepping closer. "Those documents you liberated from his office have caused him considerable inconvenience." "Good," Quinn said flatly. "They were meant to." Reeves sighed as though genuinely regretful. "He's prepared to be generous, Eastwood. Return the originals, sign a statement retracting your claims, and you can continue your charming new life here undisturbed." "And if I refuse?" The threat in Reeves' smile was unmistakable. "Then things become unpleasant, for you and for anyone close to you. Your lovely fiancé, for instance." Beatrice saw Quinn's hand drift toward his sidearm, and without thinking, she rushed forward. "Quinn, don't!" All eyes turned to her as she hurried across the street. "Miss Eden," Reeves greeted her, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "How unfortunate that you've wandered into a private conversation." "There's nothing private about threatening a man in the middle of the street," she retorted, positioning herself beside Quinn. "And if you're threatening him, you're threatening me as well." "Beatrice, go back to the store," Quinn said quietly, his eyes never leaving Reeves. "No," she replied firmly. "Whatever this is, we face it together. Remember?" Reeves watched their exchange with calculating eyes. "How touching." "Perhaps, Mr. Eastwood, you might reconsider our offer for the lady's sake." "There's nothing to reconsider," Quinn stated. "The documents are where they belong with federal authorities. I have no originals to return, and I certainly won't be retracting the truth." "Then I'm afraid," Reeves began, but was interrupted by the sound of a shotgun being cocked. Sheriff Wilson stood a few paces away, his weapon trained on Reeves' companions. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "this looks like a conversation that might benefit from my participation." Reeves' expression darkened, but he maintained his composure. "Sheriff, this is a private business matter. Threatening citizens of my town isn't private business," Wilson cut him off. "It's my business." He nodded to Quinn. "Mr. Eastwood here sent a telegram to the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver when you first showed up in November. They were quite interested to hear Blackwood's reach extended all the way to Colorado." Surprise flickered across Reeves' face before he could mask it. "You're bluffing." Marshal Jenkins will be arriving on tomorrow's train, Wilson continued as though Reeves hadn't spoken. He's particularly interested in speaking with Blackwood's representatives about witness intimidation. Reeves glanced at his companions, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll be departing on this evening's train," he announced. "But Mr. Blackwood isn't a man who forgets. Eastwood, this isn't over." "Yes," Quinn replied steadily, "it is." As Sheriff Wilson escorted the three men toward the train station, Beatrice finally allowed herself to tremble. Quinn immediately pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm fine," she assured him. "But Quinn, if they come back, they won't," he said with certainty. "Not once the federal investigation into Blackwood gains momentum. The man's a bully, and bullies rely on fear. Once people stand up to them, their power crumbles." Beatrice wasn't entirely convinced. "You can't know that for sure." Quinn pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You're right. I can't promise they won't try again. But I can promise I'll always protect you, always put your safety first." He paused, his expression grave. "If you want to postpone the wedding, give yourself time to reconsider marrying a man with enemies. Don't you dare," Beatrice interrupted fiercely. "I'm not some delicate flower who wilts at the first sign of trouble, Quinn Eastwood. I love you, and I'm marrying you on Saturday as planned." Relief and love washed over his face. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Beatrice Eden." "And don't you forget it," she replied with a smile. The wedding proceeded as planned, though with additional security arranged by Sheriff Wilson, including 2 deputies positioned discreetly outside the church. U.S. Marshal Jenkins himself attended, partly as a precaution and partly, as he admitted to Quinn later, because he wouldn't miss seeing the man who brought down Blackwood get his happy ending. As winter yielded to spring, news reached Salida that Victor Blackwood had been indicted on multiple charges, his empire crumbling as former victims found courage to speak out against him. The threat he represented faded, allowing Quinn and Beatrice to focus on building their life together. The greenhouse Quinn had built became the heart of a thriving business, as Beatrice's reputation for effective remedies spread beyond Salida. She continued working at her father's store 3 days a week, but the rest of her time was devoted to expanding her botanical knowledge and developing new preparations. Quinn's horse breeding venture prospered as well. By summer, he had a dozen fine animals in his stables and had secured contracts with the Army for cavalry mounts. The combination of their 2 enterprises brought them financial security and the respect of the community. One evening in late August, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Beatrice decided it was time to share her news. "Quinn," she began, trying to keep her voice casual, "how would you feel about converting the small room off the kitchen into a nursery?" He turned to her, puzzlement giving way to dawning understanding. "Are you saying?" She nodded, unable to suppress her smile. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby come spring." Quinn let out a whoop of joy that likely startled the horses in the nearby corral, then dropped to his knees before her chair, resting his hands reverently on her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he whispered in awe. "Our baby." Beatrice ran her fingers through his hair, heart full to bursting with love for this man who had brought such unexpected joy to her life. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Quinn replied, rising to kiss her tenderly. "I never thought I'd have this, a home, a wife I adore, a child on the way. Sometimes I worry it's all a dream I'll wake from." "Not a dream," she assured him. "Though I understand the feeling. After Thomas left, I convinced myself I wasn't meant for marriage or family. That I'd be the spinster apothecary of Salida forever," Quinn chuckled. And now I can't imagine any life but this one with you. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing one by one above the mountains. You ever regret it? Beatrice asked suddenly. Standing up to Blackwood, knowing it meant leaving Texas and starting over, Quinn considered the question seriously. I regret not doing it sooner, he finally said. But leaving Texas, finding Salida, finding you, he shook his head. Not for a moment. Even with all the danger and uncertainty it brought, especially with that, he said firmly. The right path isn't always the easy one, Beatrice, but it led me here to you, to this life we're building. How could I possibly regret that? She leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. When you first came to town after that shooting at the saloon, I overheard Lucille warning me about you. She said you were dangerous, that getting involved with you would only lead to heartache. Quinn tensed slightly beside her. She wasn't entirely wrong. I told her she was being dramatic, Beatrice continued, but she insisted. She said, you'll regret this, Bea, and do you know what I thought but was too polite to say? What's that? She turned to look up at him, moonlight silvering his features. I thought that I'd rather risk regret than wonder what if for the rest of my life. Quinn's laugh was soft and warm in the night air. A wise decision, Mrs. Eastwood. I thought so, she agreed with a smile. Though I'll admit, there were moments like when Reeves showed up with his thugs when I wondered if perhaps Lucille had been right. And now, Quinn asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Beatrice reached up to trace the line of his jaw with her fingertips. Now I know with absolute certainty that loving you is the one thing in my life I will never, ever regret. Their March baby arrived with the first wildflowers of spring, a healthy boy they named James Harold Eastwood, after both their fathers. Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys than either had anticipated. Quinn proved to be a natural father, as gentle with his son as he was with his prized horses, and infinitely more patient. By James's first birthday, Beatrice's apothecary business had grown enough to justify hiring an assistant, a bright local girl named Sarah, who showed the same passion for botanical medicine that Beatrice herself had. This allowed her more time with her son and for developing new remedies. Quinn's horse farm flourished as well. His breeding program gained recognition throughout Colorado and neighboring states, bringing clients from as far away as Wyoming and New Mexico. The property expanded to include additional pasture land and a larger barn. Life settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. They hosted Sunday dinners for Harold Eden and close friends, attended town socials, and built a life rich with community and purpose. The shadows of the past, Blackwood, Reeves, even Thomas Wyatt, faded until they were rarely mentioned or thought of. Until a letter arrived in the autumn of 1881, nearly 3 years after their marriage. It came addressed to Quinn, postmarked from Austin, Texas. Beatrice noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he opened it, how he read it through twice before setting it down on the kitchen table. Bad news? She asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice as she settled their sleepy toddler more comfortably against her shoulder. Not bad exactly, Quinn replied slowly. Unexpected. It's from my sister, Clara. Beatrice knew little about Clara beyond the basic facts. She had married young and moved to California with her husband, maintaining only sporadic contact with Quinn over the years. Is she well? Quinn nodded. She's moved back to Texas with her children. Her husband died last year, typhoid. I'm sorry, Beatrice said sincerely. That must be difficult for her. She's managing, Quinn said, still staring at the letter. But she writes that Victor Blackwood died in prison 3 months ago. His son, Nathan, has taken over what's left of the ranch and is attempting to restore the family name. Beatrice waited, sensing there was more. Nathan has reached out to Clara, apparently. He wants to make amends for his father's actions. He's invited me to return to Texas, offered me a position managing the horse breeding program he wants to establish. Quinn looked up, meeting her eyes. He's trying to run the ranch honestly, Clara says, the right way. The implications hung in the air between them. Texas had been Quinn's home for most of his adult life. His expertise with horses had been honed there. And now, with Blackwood gone and his son extending an olive branch, the door to his former life stood ajar. Are you considering it? Beatrice asked carefully, her arms tightening instinctively around James. Quinn was silent for a long moment. I'd be lying if I said the offer didn't stir something in me, he finally admitted. Texas was home once, and Clara being there. He trailed off, then shook his head firmly. But no. My home is here now with you and James. What we've built in Salida is more than I ever dreamed possible. Relief flooded through Beatrice, though she tried not to show it too plainly. You should visit, though, she suggested. See your sister, meet your nieces and nephews. Perhaps even assess whether Nathan Blackwood is sincere in his desire to change his father's legacy. Quinn looked at her with surprise. You wouldn't mind? Of course I'd mind, she said with a small smile. I'd miss you terribly, but family is important, Quinn. Clara needs her brother, especially now. The decision was made. Quinn would travel to Texas after the first snow when the horse farm required less of his attention. He would stay for a month, long enough to reconnect with Clara and evaluate Nathan Blackwood's offer, even though he had no intention of accepting it. The weeks leading up to his departure passed too quickly for Beatrice's liking. Though she maintained a brave face, the prospect of managing the farm and caring for an energetic toddler alone for a month was daunting. More than that, she had grown so accustomed to Quinn's presence, his warmth beside her at night, that the thought of his absence created a hollow feeling in her chest. The morning of his departure dawned cold and clear, the mountains sharp against the pale blue sky. They stood on the train platform, James balanced on Quinn's hip, the little boy too young to understand why his father was leaving. It's only a month, Quinn reminded her, his free arm wrapped around her waist. I'll be back before you know it. I know, Beatrice said, forcing brightness into her voice. And you'll write. Every day, he promised, though the post may not be quite so regular. The train whistle blew, announcing the final boarding call. Quinn passed James to Beatrice, then cupped her face in his hands, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. I love you, he said against her lips. You and James are my whole world, Beatrice. Never doubt that. And we love you, she replied, blinking back tears. Have a safe journey. Give Clara our best. With a final embrace, Quinn boarded the train. Beatrice stood with James on the platform until the train pulled away, Quinn's face at the window growing smaller until it disappeared around a bend. The first 2 weeks of Quinn's absence passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice threw herself into work, dividing her time between the apothecary and overseeing the minimal winter needs of the horse farm with the help of the 2 hands Quinn employed. James, perhaps sensing his mother's distraction, became clingy and fussy, making evenings particularly challenging. Letters arrived from Quinn regularly, filled with news of his reunion with Clara and her 3 children, descriptions of the changes in the area since he'd left, and always, declarations of how much he missed his wife and son. Each letter ended the same way. Counting the days until I return to you both. It was in the 3rd week that the tone of his letters changed subtly. He wrote of meetings with Nathan Blackwood, describing the young man's genuine remorse for his father's actions and his ambitious plans to transform the Blackwood Ranch into a model of ethical ranching practices. Quinn mentioned, almost casually, that Nathan had increased his offer, proposing a partnership rather than just a management position. "The opportunity here is significant," Quinn wrote. "Nathan has the resources to build something truly exceptional, and he values my experience. He suggested I could bring you and James to Texas, establish a similar apothecary business here where there's great need for your skills." Beatrice read this passage several times, a knot forming in her stomach. Though Quinn hadn't explicitly stated he was reconsidering Nathan's offer, the mere fact that he was relaying these details suggested it had captured his interest more than he'd initially admitted. Her reply was measured, supporting without encouraging. "It sounds like Nathan is sincere in his desire to make amends," she wrote. "I'm glad you're able to help guide his plans, even in this advisory capacity during your visit." Quinn's next letter, however, was more direct. "I've been thinking about Nathan's offer more seriously," he confessed. "Clara believes I should accept. She's alone here with the children, and having family nearby would ease her burden considerably. The potential for the horse breeding program is extraordinary, far beyond what we could achieve in Salida with our limited resources." Beatrice's heart sank as she continued reading. "I know we've built a life in Colorado that we both cherish, but I find myself wondering if Texas might offer even greater opportunities for all of us. James would grow up knowing his cousins. Your medicinal knowledge would serve a community with far less access to doctors than Salida. And I admit there's something about this land that still calls to me." The letter ended with a question that kept Beatrice awake that night. "Could you consider it, Beatrice? Could you contemplate making Texas our home?" Conflicting emotions warred within her as she tried to formulate a response. She loved Quinn and wanted his happiness. She understood the pull of family. Clara had lost her husband, and her need for her brother's support was genuine. The professional opportunities he described were tempting, but Salida was her home. Her father was here. The business she'd built from scratch was here. The community that had supported her through her broken engagement, celebrated her marriage to Quinn, welcomed their son, all of it was here in Colorado. Before she could compose a reply, another letter arrived, this one expressing Quinn's decision to extend his stay by 2 additional weeks. "There are details of Nathan's proposal I need to explore more thoroughly before making any decision," he explained. "I miss you and James desperately, but I believe this additional time is necessary for our family's future." That evening, after putting James to bed, Beatrice sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the winter chill. The stars seemed especially bright over the mountains, the silence profound in a way it never was during Quinn's presence. She thought about the day they'd met, the gunshot that had drawn her into the street, into his orbit. She remembered his patience as he courted her, the greenhouse he'd built before he even knew if she would accept his proposal. She recalled the fear when Reeves had threatened them, and Quinn's unwavering courage. Most of all, she remembered his words on this very porch when she'd asked if he regretted standing up to Blackwood. "The right path isn't always the easy one, Beatrice. But it led me here to you, to this life we're building. How could I possibly regret that? Had something changed? Had the life they'd built together somehow become insufficient for him?" The next morning, Beatrice made a decision. After arranging for Sarah to watch James and the apothecary, and ensuring the farm hands understood their responsibilities, she purchased a ticket on the afternoon train to Denver, the first leg of the journey to Texas. Harold Eden tried to dissuade her. "You can't just go chasing after him, Beatrice. He'll be home in 2 weeks. 2 weeks in which he might make a decision that affects our entire future," she countered. "I need to see this place, meet this Nathan Blackwood, understand what's drawing Quinn back before I can form my own opinion." Her father sighed, recognizing the determination in his daughter's eyes. "You always were stubborn," he said fondly. "Like your mother, she'd be proud of you, you know. For impulsively traveling across 2 states with a toddler, for fighting for your family," he corrected gently. "For not letting fear keep you from what matters." The journey was grueling, particularly with an active 2-year-old who didn't understand why they were on a train for days on end. James alternated between excited exploration of their compartment and inconsolable crying for his father. By the time they reached the small Texas town nearest the Blackwood Ranch, both mother and son were exhausted. They took a room at the local hotel, where Beatrice bathed James and put him down for a much-needed nap before sending a message to the Blackwood Ranch. She wrote simply, "Quinn, it's Beatrice. We're at the Continental Hotel in town. Please come when you can." While waiting, she stood at the window, taking in the unfamiliar landscape. Where Colorado was dramatic towering mountains and deep valleys, this part of Texas was subtler in its beauty. Rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, dotted with mesquite trees and occasional stands of oak. The winter grass was a pale gold under the clear blue sky. It was beautiful, she acknowledged, but it wasn't home. A knock at the door startled her from her contemplation. James still slept soundly, so she crossed the room quietly and opened the door, expecting to see Quinn. Instead, a young man perhaps a few years her junior stood in the hallway. He was well-dressed, with dark hair and eyes that held a wary intelligence. "Mrs. Eastwood?" he asked, his voice cultured but with the distinctive drawl of a native Texan. "I'm Nathan Blackwood. Your husband is out riding the north section with the foreman, but I received your message. I thought I might escort you to the ranch myself, if you're willing." Beatrice hesitated, studying the son of the man who had once threatened her family. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll wait for Quinn to return." Nathan nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her caution. "Of course. May I come in briefly? There are things I believe we should discuss before you see your husband." The request was unexpected, but Beatrice's curiosity overcame her wariness. She stepped back, allowing him into the room but positioning herself protectively near the bed where James still slept. Nathan remained standing just inside the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want to be direct with you, Mrs. Eastwood. I've offered your husband a significant opportunity at the ranch, a partnership in a breeding program that could become the finest in Texas." "So I understand from his letters," Beatrice replied evenly. "What you may not understand is how much the ranch needs him," Nathan continued. "My father's legacy is complicated. The Blackwood name is associated with corruption and cruelty. Quinn's reputation for integrity is exactly what we need to rebuild trust in the community." Beatrice considered this. "And you believe that justifies asking him to uproot his family, to abandon the life we've built in Colorado?" "I believe in offering him the opportunity to make that choice," Nathan countered. "The Quinn Eastwood I knew 5 years ago loved this land. It was in his blood. And now his sister is here, his family connections. His wife and son are in Colorado," Beatrice reminded him sharply. Nathan inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Which is why I suggested you could all relocate. There's a place for you here too, Mrs. Eastwood. Your husband speaks highly of your botanical knowledge, your medicinal skills. We could build you a larger greenhouse than the one in Colorado, provide resources for your work." The offer was tempting, Beatrice had to admit, but there was something in Nathan's manner, a calculation behind his words that gave her pause. "Why is this so important to you, Mr. Blackwood? Surely there are other experienced horsemen in Texas who could manage your breeding program." Nathan's expression shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the confident exterior. Because Quinn Eastwood was the only man who stood up to my father and lived to tell about it, he said quietly. Because everyone in this county knows it was his testimony that finally brought Victor Blackwood to justice. Having him return, work alongside me openly, it sends a message that things have truly changed. Beatrice understood then. Quinn wasn't just a skilled horse breeder to Nathan. He was a symbol, a tool for redemption. "And what does Quinn want?" she asked. "You should ask him that yourself," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Beatrice turned to see Quinn standing there, his expression a complex mixture of surprise, joy, and concern. Nathan stepped back, nodding to them both. "I'll leave you to talk," he said, moving toward the door. "Mrs. Eastwood, regardless of what you decide, it was a pleasure to meet you." When the door closed behind Nathan, Quinn crossed the room in 3 long strides and gathered Beatrice into his arms. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice muffled against her hair. "Is everything all right?" "Is James sleeping?" she assured him, gesturing to the bed where their son continued his nap, undisturbed by the conversation. "We're both fine. Tired from the journey, but fine." Quinn pulled back to study her face, his hand still resting on her waist. "Then why?" "Because your letters changed," she said simply. "Because you were making decisions that affect our family without me being able to see what you were seeing, understand what you were understanding." A flash of guilt crossed his features. "I wasn't making decisions, Beatrice. I was exploring possibilities. Important enough possibilities that you extended your stay. Significant enough that you asked if I could consider making Texas our home." She took a deep breath. "I needed to see this place for myself, Quinn. I needed to meet Nathan Blackwood and understand what's drawing you back here." Quinn guided her to sit on the small settee near the window, keeping his voice low to avoid waking James. "I should have been clearer in my letters," he admitted. "This visit has been complicated. Being back in Texas, seeing Clara and her children, riding this land again, it stirred up feelings I thought I'd put behind me." "Feelings of belonging," Beatrice suggested. He nodded slowly. "Yes, and when Nathan made his offer, it seemed to answer so many questions at once. How to help Clara, who's struggling as a widow with 3 children. How to expand our horse breeding beyond what's possible in Salida. How to use my experience to help redeem something that was once corrupt." "Noble aims," Beatrice acknowledged. "But what about our life in Colorado? Your promise that we would build something together there." Quinn took her hands in his. "That's the struggle, Beatrice. I made you promises and I intend to keep them. But I can't deny that Nathan's offer is tempting, not just professionally but personally. Being near Clara, giving James cousins to grow up with. And you couldn't ask me to come to Texas to see it for myself," Beatrice concluded, "so I had to come on my own." A rueful smile touched his lips. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I asked you to come, you'd see it as me having already made my decision. Afraid that you'd hate it here and I'd have to choose between my wife's happiness and what might be best for our future." James stirred on the bed, making small noises that indicated he would soon wake. Beatrice rose and went to him, smoothing his hair gently. "Papa!" the boy exclaimed suddenly, his eyes flying open as he recognized Quinn. He scrambled up, arms outstretched, and Quinn swept him into a fierce hug. "Hello, little man," Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you something terrible." The reunion momentarily overshadowed their serious conversation, as James babbled excitedly about the train journey, and Quinn listened with exaggerated interest. Beatrice watched them together, her heart full despite her uncertainty about the future. When James's excitement eventually waned, Quinn suggested they ride out to the ranch together. You should see it before we talk any further, he said. See what Nathan's building, meet Clara and the children. Then we can make this decision together, as we should have from the start. The Blackwood Ranch was impressive, Beatrice had to admit. The main house was larger than any private residence she'd seen, with broad verandas and tall windows that caught the winter sunlight. Beyond it stretched pastures and corrals, barns and outbuildings that spoke of generations of wealth accumulation, not all of it, she reminded herself, acquired honestly. Clara Eastwood Reynolds greeted them warmly, her resemblance to Quinn evident in her blue eyes and the shape of her smile. Her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 4 to 10, immediately took to James, whisking him away to see a new litter of kittens in the barn under the watchful eye of a housekeeper. I was beginning to think Quinn was imagining you, Clara teased as she poured coffee in her cozy sitting room. The way he talks about you and James, I half expected angels with halos. Beatrice laughed despite her nerves. I assure you were quite ordinary. Hardly, Quinn interjected, his eyes warm as they rested on her. There's nothing ordinary about either of you. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough. Clara was easy to like, forthright and warm, with none of the calculation Beatrice had sensed in Nathan. The children were well behaved and clearly adored their Uncle Quinn. James blossomed under their attention, showing none of the shyness he sometimes displayed with strangers. After dinner, Nathan showed Beatrice the plans for the breeding program he hoped Quinn would oversee, an ambitious vision that would indeed require Quinn's expertise to succeed. He also indicated a smaller building on the property plans. This would be your domain, he explained. An apothecary and greenhouse combined, larger than what you have in Colorado. The nearest doctor is 30 miles away. Your skills would be invaluable to the ranch hands and their families. It was all very thoughtfully presented, Beatrice had to acknowledge. If circumstances were different, if they were just starting out, with no roots yet established elsewhere, the opportunity would be difficult to refuse. Later, after James had fallen asleep in the room Clara had prepared for them, Beatrice and Quinn walked out onto the veranda. The night was cool but not cold, the Texas winter milder than Colorado's. Stars crowded the vast sky, and in the distance, coyotes called to one another across the open range. "What do you think?" Quinn asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Beatrice considered her answer carefully. "I think I understand now," she said slowly, "why this place pulls at you. It's beautiful in its way, different from Salida but with its own character." Quinn nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Clara is lovely," Beatrice went on. "I can see how much she needs you, how much the children adore you, and Nathan's offer is generous, more than fair." "But," Quinn prompted, sensing her reservation. "But it's not home," she said simply. "Not for me. And I don't think it's truly home for you anymore either, Quinn. I think it's your past, a good past in many ways with people you love, but our future is in Colorado." Quinn leaned against the veranda railing, his expression thoughtful. "How can you be so sure?" Beatrice moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching. "Because home isn't just a place," she said softly. "It's where we've put down roots together. It's the community that supported us when Blackwood's men came threatening. It's my father, who's getting older and has only us and James. It's the greenhouse you built with your own hands because you knew it would make me happy." She turned to face him fully. "Nathan wants you here partly because of what you represent, the man who stood up to his father. But in Salida, you're loved for who you are, not what you symbolize." Quinn was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "When I first came to Salida," he finally said, "I was running away from something. From Blackwood, from the corruption I'd been part of, from my own mistakes. But then I met you, and suddenly I was running toward something instead. He took her hands in his. "You're right, Beatrice. Texas is my past. A past I needed to revisit to make peace with, but our life together, that's my future, and it's in Colorado." Relief flooded through her. "You're certain? You won't regret turning down Nathan's offer?" Quinn smiled, pulling her closer. "Do you remember what you told me once about Lucille warning you against me? She said you'd regret getting involved with me." Beatrice nodded, a smile tugging at her lips as she recalled the conversation. "And I told you then, as I'll tell you now," Quinn continued, his voice low and certain. "I haven't regretted a thing yet. Not one decision that led me to you, to James, to the life we've built together." He kissed her then under the Texas stars, a kiss that felt like coming home despite being thousands of miles from Salida. When they parted, Beatrice rested her forehead against his. "Nathan will be disappointed," she murmured. "Nathan will survive," Quinn replied. "And we'll help Clara too. We can offer her a place in Salida if she wants it, or visit more regularly. But our home is where we've chosen to make it together." They returned to Colorado a week later, the winter giving way to early spring as they traveled north. Quinn had explained his decision to Nathan, who had accepted it with grace if not complete understanding. Clara had extracted a promise of summer visits, her children already planning adventures with their cousin James. As the train pulled into Salida Station, Harold Eden waiting on the platform with Sarah and the farm hands, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where they belonged, where Quinn had found redemption, where she had found her purpose, where together they had built something neither could have imagined alone. "Home," Quinn said simply as they disembarked, James perched on his shoulders and pointing excitedly at the familiar faces greeting them. "Home," Beatrice agreed, taking his hand in hers. In the years that followed, their life in Salida flourished beyond their early dreams. Quinn's horse farm became renowned throughout the West, his breeding methods studied and emulated by ranchers from Canada to Mexico. Beatrice's apothecary expanded into a proper clinic, with a young doctor from Denver eventually joining her practice, allowing her to focus on the botanical remedies that were her true passion. James grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's affinity for horses with his mother's interest in healing, developing innovative treatments for equine ailments that drew attention from veterinary experts. He was joined by two siblings, a sister, Clara, named for her aunt, and another brother, Harold, named for his grandfather who lived long enough to bounce his namesake on his knee before passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84. Clara Eastwood Reynolds eventually did move to Salida after her oldest son left for college. She established a small millinery shop that became the talk of 3 counties, her Texas-influenced designs bringing a touch of Southern elegance to the mountain community. And on quiet evenings, when the children were grown and the house was peaceful, Quinn and Beatrice would often sit together on the porch he had built with his own hands all those years ago, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Any regrets?" Beatrice would sometimes ask, a teasing light in her eyes though the question had long since been answered. And Quinn, silver now threading through his sandy hair but his blue eyes as bright as ever, would always answer the same way, pulling her close as the stars began to appear above the mountains they both called home. Not a single one.